Welcome to our webinar for this evening. My name is Emily Nolan and I'm the Communications Officer for the Irish Wildlife Trust. And we're going to be hearing from Daniel Fildes this evening. He's a professional filmmaker and photographer here in Ireland, working with Dunsany Nature Reserve, and a career that's spanning South Africa and Southeast Asia and Ireland. So we're very excited to hear from him tonight, and I'm sure he'll have some fantastic messages for us this evening. And just for those of you who may not be familiar with the Irish Wildlife Trust, we are a members organisation. We've been in existence since 1979, and we've been at the forefront of nature conservation for the last 40 years. We work to create a better future for Ireland's biodiversity by motivating people to supporting people to take action to protect and restore Ireland's habitats. And we are a nationwide organisation with a strong membership base and a small staff based in Dublin and a wide branch of dedicated and passionate volunteers all around the country. So we'll hear from Daniel first, and then we can get started with the webinar.
Thank you very much. So my name is Daniel. I am a wildlife photographer and videographer as well. My main body of work is with Dunsany Nature Reserve. So I've been working with them from, I think, September 2020 now. Started very simply. I asked, could I go in for a day, take some photos, and then any photos I took, I'd pass on for the reserve to use. And after my first day, I got asked if I would stay on as the official photographer. So that's where I've been from then. But I have also been, as was just said there, I've been to South Africa as well. I spent 2 months down in South Africa as an intern with Marine Dynamics. And I've also done my freshwater and marine biology in ATU in Galway. So with all of that tied together, I've been in several different places around Ireland, South Africa, and recently Southeast Asia as well. And I've got a lot of photos and footage that I've got to show. So yeah, I'll hopefully show my best ones anyway, or some of my best ones, and I'll talk about maybe some of the encounters I've had, some tips and tricks, kind of best practices, and the use of wildlife photography in conservation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Daniel. And just before we get started, for anyone who's not familiar with us, if you would like to support the work of the Irish Wildlife Trust, you can join our weekly newsletter or follow us on social media and amplify any of our campaigns or posts on socials. Or if you'd like to donate or join our membership, we have a few different options for membership, from individuals to families, and we have concessions for students as well. And because with your support, we're better equipped to tackle the issues in our biodiversity crisis, just one step at a time. And yeah, we're just trying to build a collective effort to shape a better future for Ireland's wildlife. And we can't do this without the generous support of our donors and our members and the people all around the country who support our work and amplify our message. And even you coming here this evening and attending this webinar, sharing this webinar, speaking about the messages that you learned tonight, and telling as many people as possible is just all part of the work that we need to do and what needs to be done to protect and preserve our biodiversity in Ireland. And so, yeah, just a reminder to everyone, this webinar is being recorded, but none of you are on screen, as you know. But if you want to ask any questions, you can just put them into the Q&A box and we can ask them after the presentation. And this recording will also be sent to you afterwards, and we'll also upload it to YouTube. So if you'd like to share it with someone who wasn't able to attend tonight, that will be possible in a few days' time. So yeah, we're just going to get started now. And thanks for coming.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. I've got a nice little presentation up and ready to go. Hopefully all of it works. Okay, so I'll just double check. That is all view. That's all okay there, is it?
Yeah. There you go. Perfect.
Okay, that box at the top should disappear now in a second. So this is basically the use of photography and videography in wildlife conservation. So I'm going to start with this. Sorry, now I've got a message popping up. Okay, Right, so I'll get straight into it. The impact of photography. So photography presents us with a fleeting glimpse into a world that, although is often nearby, is rarely seen up close. And that is as simply as I can put it. Photography captures a single moment. It might be something passing by, kind of last minute unexpected, just like this fox here, or it could be planned. But the whole idea is to capture a single moment and then share that. So that can be used to portray a message, talk about issues, but the main fact of it is it's freezing a moment and sharing that. So for this example, I took this photo of a fox. A lot of you will probably have seen this. It kind of went viral back in September. I was down in a barley field in County Cork. I was actually photographing swallows that were flying over and back over this barley field. And while I was standing in one of the tracks left behind by a tractor, I noticed some movement down the bottom of the track, and lo and behold, it was this fox here. So that video, just of my reaction, kind of went a bit viral, but it just goes to kind of prove the impact that a single photo can have. So in this situation, I know to me it's just a fox, but it's also kind of it's gone far and wide, and it's just proving how powerful photography is to share messages and talk about issues as well. So a little bit of background
Sorry,
information.
Daniel.
Yeah.
Can we just check? So your screen actually isn't changing. We're just still seeing the front slide.
Oh, my apologies.
No worries.
I'll just escape there and go back into it.
Yeah. We can see the fox now.
Oh, you can see the fox there.
Yeah, we're just looking at the Canva.
Okay, yeah. I'll just try it this way. Now, can you still see that?
Yes, yeah, we can see that now. Okay.
Okay, right. So that's the fox that I was talking about. But yeah, this is just one example of how photography can have a massive impact on those looking at it. That screen changing okay?
Yes, yeah. Sorry.
Okay, good to go. Right, so a little bit of background. I have always had a love and a fascination with wildlife, outdoors, nature. I grew up watching David Attenborough, Steve Irwin, anything that was out of the ordinary, outdoors, underwater, in a jungle, in a forest. I was fascinated with it. Finding spiders around the house, it goes back to childhood. I've always had that fascination. But weirdly enough, the fascination with the ocean, that was learned. So both my parents grew up in the Midlands. So I don't particularly live near the coast myself, but I would have grown up going on family holidays to the west of Ireland, and that's where I would have kind of found my first interest in the ocean. So a week-long family holiday would have been majority spent in a rock pool looking for the most unusual creatures that I could find, or snorkeling or fishing. But long story short, I would have been as close to the ocean as possible. Similar to that, I grew up hearing stories from my grandfather. So he's a farmer, and anytime I was on the farm with him, he would have been sharing stories about any kind of wildlife that he would have encountered growing up, including stories such as like finding woodpeckers back when there weren't supposed to be woodpeckers in Ireland. But anyway, and now since then, I have completed a degree in freshwater and marine biology. I've got a bit of a background in conservation studies as well. And like I said earlier, I have spent time in South Africa and now with Dunsany as well. So I'm going to talk about that coming up. Last year, I took a kind of slightly different step. I took a jump and I got myself a dive housing, which underwater photography has been something that I have dreamed of getting into, and I've been lucky enough that I've got into it in the last year. But this photo here, this I actually took on the first day I tested out the dive housing, and I entered that into a competition, the biggest wildlife photography competition in the world, Wildlife Photographer of the Year, and I made the final round. So I didn't make the final 100, but I made the top 5% of 60,000 photos, I think it was. Some of which are National Geographic photographers, BBC photographers. So I think that was a nice little sign to keep going with the underwater photography. But that's just a step in a direction that I'm hoping to take and continue for the foreseeable. So I'll start from the very basics, and I'll quickly move on. I won't spend too much time on this. But yeah, the first steps to becoming a wildlife photographer. So the first thing I did, and it's priority number one, get a camera. Doesn't matter how expensive it is or how cheap it is. I started on a very budget camera and then learn how to use it and learn how to use it blindfolded. YouTube is your best friend. I have spent hours on YouTube looking up anything that I had an issue with. It doesn't matter what camera you have, there is a video on YouTube showing you how to use the camera and how to get better at using that camera. So that was the first bit of advice that I'm going to give. Get a camera and learn how to use it if that is something that you're looking to do, but that's the first step. The second priority is learn about your subjects, learn what you're going to be photographing, learn what calls they make, where you might find them, what time of day they'll be out, various different habits they might have. Basically get to know what you're looking to photograph like the back of your hand. That's the most important thing. If I want to go and photograph owls, I'm not going to go out at 3 in the day looking for them. So that's the second piece of advice I'll give, is learn everything you can about what you're going to be photographing. Right, so planning for wildlife photography and videography. This is just a kind of day in the life, if you like. First off, like I said, research your intended location and species and everything you can about that. So for this entire example, I'm going to talk about cuckoos. So if I'm going to try and photograph cuckoos, I'm going to first look up where I might find them. So that is marshland, bogland, wetlands, rough boggy areas, basically. I'm also going to look up what time of day I might find them, various habits they might have, sounds they make, calls they make, anything that's going to help me get closer to them and photograph or film them. Second of all is your equipment list. I cannot stress how important this is. Make sure, if you want to write it down by hand, have it on your iPad or phone, have a list. I have packed everything before: lenses, batteries, spare clothing, got to the location and left my camera at home. That has happened. I can't stress enough how important an equipment list is. Also, pack for the weather. If you know you're going to be going up to a mountain, bring a rain jacket. Right, so plan an entry point, a location to set up, and tell someone your plan. I'll continue with the cuckoos. So if I found a bog that I'm going to plan on going to, Google Earth, Google Maps, find somewhere to park beforehand. There's no point driving down, trying to get there before sunrise, and then I don't know where I'm going to park. As well as that, tell somebody where you're going. It is bare minimum safety. You could be out in the middle of nowhere and you lose signal or your phone dies. Have a plan of the time you're going to be there and the time you're going to get back. And then if something goes wrong, at least somebody knows the plan has gone astray. But yeah, basically plan beforehand, plan your route. Also, it kind of ties into this one, set an arrival time and a setup time. So for cuckoos, if I want to get there for sunrise and sunrise is at 7:30, I'm not going to arrive at 7:30. I might arrive at 7. That gives me time to set up my camera and then get into position if it's, say, a 20-minute walk to where I'm going. Before that, and it kind of ties back into that, set up everything beforehand. I'll have my camera set up, my mic set up. I'll have taken photos and a video just to make sure everything is set up nicely in the light. And then again, carry out an equipment check. So go through that list, make sure you have everything, batteries, bottle of water, anything you might need, make sure you have it ready before you start off trekking to where you're going to go. And then lastly, and probably the most important, practice patience and ethical photography. keep your distance, be mindful of what you're going to be photographing. If you know it's an animal that's quite shy around humans, be especially cautious around that. You don't want their only experience with a human to be negative. You don't want them to be terrified of humans from that moment on. Take your time, approach quietly and cautiously. So that's basically kind of the main gist of it, but I'll get into it a little bit more. The number one rule that I have to stress, I can't stress this enough, never ever prioritize a photo or a video over the well-being of the animal. There's too many times I've seen photographers get too close to something to photograph it. The photo should not be the number one priority. The welfare of the animal should be the number one priority. So if it's fox cubs near a den, I'm going to stay at a distance that I'm not going to be spotted by fox cubs, and I'm not going to get too close and end up scaring them off. So never prioritize the shot over the well-being of the animal. Just for an example, this photo here, probably one of my favorites. This single shot took 3 weeks to get. So this was 3 weeks of 5 a.m. wake-ups. I'll also just preface this by saying this was taken under license in Dunsany Nature Reserve. It was taken for a documentary we were working on. But my point is, patience pays off. I could have taken this shot in a few days, excuse me, but I would have risked getting too close and spooking either the parents or the chicks. So my point is, stay calm, approach cautiously, let them kind of get used to you, let them relax, and then worry about the shots. So I'll just briefly I'll run over these very quickly. These are the 3 aspects of photography. Your shutter speed is how smooth or how sharp you want your photo to be. So the higher the shutter speed, the higher the fraction of a second, the sharper it's going to be. So these are 2 photos of a pheasant. The photo on the left was taken at 1/640th of a second, and you can see it's still a bit blurry around the wingtips. So basically, with shutter speed, anything that's moving very, very quickly, whether it's wings beating or a kingfisher diving into the water, you're going to want a higher shutter speed. So the photo on the right, you can see, was a higher shutter speed, and it's just frozen the image, whereas the other one beforehand, it's still got a bit of motion blur to it. Secondly is your f-stop or your aperture. So that is basically how much of the background you want to be in focus. So the wider the aperture, the more blurry the background will be. The way that I've kind of explained this before, if you are standing out in nature and somebody points to a tree 200 meters away and says, "Oh, what's that bird on the top of it?" or points to whatever at a distance, one of the first things you might do is squint. And that's basically what this does. It closes down the aperture to focus in on the back or on the background. And that's exactly what's going on here. So I have 2 photos of deer here. The one on the right has a higher f-stop or a lower aperture, a wider aperture. The f-stop on the right means that the background is going to be more in focus. So if that was lower, if that was an f, say 4, you wouldn't see the tree in the background. It would be blurry like the photo on the right. And then lastly is ISO. This is kind of your brightness setting. The higher the ISO, the brighter it is. But that also means the grainier the photo will be, the noisier it will be. So the photo on the right is ISO 800. These are about 2 photos of a pine marten. They're also the only photos I've taken of a pine marten, so I need to brush up on that. But the lower ISO means it's less noisy, less grainy. It's a better image. But again, the photo on the left was much darker, so I had to have a higher ISO, and then it kind of balances it out, if you know what I mean. So the higher ISO, the brighter it is, but the noisier it is. So from a conservation point of view, photography is visual storytelling. That's outside of conservation. It's basically the same thing. A photo can either be plain and simple. It might just be a single subject, which I'll show in a second, But for this, I'm going to use this photo as an example. You want your photo to tell a story. You want it to be captivating. You want somebody to look at it, be drawn in by it, and ideally either ask questions or kind of bring in a sense of wonder to it. So I'm going to break this photo down as to why it is kind of a good example of visual storytelling. So this is a spiny lobster or a crayfish. This is off the coast of Wexford in Ireland. This is near Hook Head. These species are listed as vulnerable in Ireland, so they are protected. You can't catch and eat them. This was about, I think, 20 meters down, but I'm basically going to break down the parts to this photo and why it's kind of eye-catching. So the way I kind of like to describe it, somebody said it to me a long time ago, a good photo has to have a hook, kind of like a catchy song, something that's going to instantly bring your attention. And in this photo, that is that pool of light in the middle of the photo. You've got nice oranges, yellows, and the unusual looking crayfish that tends to bring people in. So that is the first point that you need for your photo, is basically something that is going to draw your attention. And that can then lead on to a story for conservation, to talk about issues, in this case, what this is, it being a spiny crayfish, and that they're listed as vulnerable and they're protected in Ireland. You can see that everything else is out of focus, pretty much bar the diver. The crayfish is perfectly in focus, perfectly lit up. Everything else is slightly blurrier, it's less focused, and it's darker as well. So instantly, anyone that looks at this, the first thing they're going to notice is what I want them to notice, which is the crayfish. And then I can bring into it the conversation around its conservation status. The diver in this I added purely because it adds a sense of scale and perspective. You can see how big these were. If the diver wasn't there, you might be guessing as to the size of that. You might guess that it's 2 feet long or 6 inches long. Whereas to have a person in it or something to give it perspective, that often kind of adds to the dramatic effect of a photo like that. So I'm going to talk about 2 photos. I like both of them. These are very early photos on from when I started, but I'm going to kind of demonstrate how, even though they're both good photos, they're eye-catching for different reasons. The first one being, this is just a fox. It's a nice looking fox, a very healthy fox, but it's just a fox. This might hold somebody's attention for a few seconds and then you'll lose it. Whereas the second photo will hold your attention much longer. And the first thing that I can think of why is because anyone that I've shown this photo to, they always ask the same question instantly: what happened next? And that is exactly what I want from a conservation photo. If I'm trying to bring about an issue or to advocate for another conservation story, whether it's puffins or a different species, you want an aspect kind of similar to this where somebody's going to ask what happened next. You're going to hold their attention. This photo in particular, I have been asked that, and unfortunately to say, this is as dramatic as it got. Afterwards, this cock pheasant walked off, and so did the fox. But my point is, even though the fox mightn't be as detailed as the photo before, it still has more of a kind of wow factor, and that's what's going to hold somebody's attention, which is crucial for conservation photography. So continuing with the power of photography, as I've said earlier on, photography freezes a single moment that gives the viewer a glimpse into an often unseen world. These skills can be applied for use in conservation efforts too. So I am going to talk about 4 main uses for photography in conservation. I have examples of all of these, and I'm going to tell maybe a couple of stories about each one. So first up, as I mentioned earlier on, I did freshwater and marine biology in college down in GMIT, which halfway through my college experience, it transitioned into ATU now, so Atlantic Technological University. They have a fantastic marine biology course there. They're very hands-on, excellent experience. You'll learn a lot of skills through this course. So I've just put down some of the modules that I did through them. Botany and zoology, exactly what it says in the tin. Limnology and oceanography. So for anyone that doesn't know, limnology is basically the study of freshwater systems, so rivers and lakes. So oceanography, you're more looking at the coasts, and limnology, we could be in a river or a lake, and it's basically how those ecosystems run and work. Field and lab techniques, this was our skills learning section. So whether it was in a lab learning how to use a microscope, or out in the field learning how to use a computer to test for dissolved oxygen in a river. So all of this I would have done through college as well. Experimental design and statistics, this would have been the more mathematical, statistical side of things, equally as important though. This comes into any study in ecology, biology, very, very important. Not the most exciting, some might say, but definitely important. And then there is the ecology of aquatic environments, which is exactly what it sounds like. This would have been looking at various different marine and freshwater environments and looking at the ecology of both of them. So with Marine Dynamics are a shark diving company in South Africa, but they've also set up a sister company, Dyer Island Cruises. And basically on top of the shark cage diving, they now have a trust for Dyer Island, which is a colony just off the coast. They're based in Gansbaai, which is about 2 hours east of Cape Town. So these two organizations work with cetaceans, so your dolphins and whales, the endangered African penguins, Cape fur seals, and then your shark species as well. There'll be other species that they work with as well, I'll talk about in a little while, but these are the main 5 that they'll work with. So the first that I will talk about is the use of photography in identification. So this animal here is an Indian humpback dolphin. It's one of the rarest animals on the planet. There's, I think, just under 500 of them left. I was very, very lucky to see these on 2 different occasions down there. They've been spotted in the bay down in South Africa where I was for the last few years, and part of the work that they do is trying to identify them. So one of my jobs was to photograph these dolphins, in particular their dorsal fins, and then try and identify any features that might make that individual stand out. So in this one, I've just circled, you can see it here. The dorsal fin has a notch on the top of it. And then with the markings around that, this photo is put through software which runs through all of the past photos taken, and it will identify this individual. So this individual had been seen before, a year and a half previous, in the same bay. And thanks to photography, even though this interaction was only about 15 seconds long, we were able to identify this individual. So that's just an example, but the same goes for all whale species. Here in Ireland, it's used to identify humpback whales, fin whales, any whale and dolphin species. Their dorsal fins and their flukes, their tails, they're all unique. They're basically fingerprints. So photography is used to identify them. Similarly, this is a guitar shark or a guitar fish. Again, I'll just preface this by saying this was not on my dive housing, so this is a GoPro, so excuse the quality. But these are quite elusive creatures. They're very kind of, there's not much known about them. But I worked with one of the projects down there in South Africa where we tried to identify them. So these photos would have been uploaded to a database and kind of stored aside. And then, like I've circled there, the spot patterns on their backs, if another photo is taken in a year's time or whenever, these can be run off each other and it can be used to determine whether or not it's been sighted before. Another use that I'll just mention here is the leopard cat shark in the bottom corner that has what's called a spaghetti tag on the back of it. You might have seen these before. Shark Week do a lot of them, where basically they'll jab the tail of the shark, doesn't hurt them, and it sticks this tag to them, and there's a number on that. So if we catch anything that has a tag, we'll photograph the tag, and then we can bring that back and determine its location, where it was first tagged, whether it's male or female. All those different details come from that single tag, and photos are the most ideal for capturing that. So I'll jump back to Ireland briefly. Another use for photo identification. This was down in Wicklow. I won't say exactly where, but I was actually out photographing deer down there. I was trying to film and photograph deer, and I had this bird of prey flying. At the time, I didn't know what it was. I had an idea, but I wasn't sure. And something that photography is very useful in, say, comparison to just using binoculars. Binoculars, you're looking at it in live time. You can't stop, rewind, and go over what you're looking at, which I could do in this because I took a photo of it, or I took several photos. This turned out to be a female hen harrier. I actually showed this photo to a friend of mine who's working down in Wicklow as a park ranger, and he told me where I photographed this bird. It wasn't even on record in that location. So another very useful application of photography, both identifying individual species and identifying locations as well. So I was debating whether or not to include this, but I think it's important. This stag here, this I took about 2 years ago in Dunsany Nature Reserve. This is another use for photography. So part of what I'm doing at the moment, like as in right now and in general in Dunsany, is I try to photograph any of the stags that we have. Each year when their antlers grow back, they fall off around April and they grow back almost fully by August. Their antlers are one of the fastest growing organisms in the animal planet. These antlers are different each year, meaning similar to a whale's dorsal fin, they're like fingerprints. So I don't know if you can see my mouse here, but I'll try and point out. This left antler here, or the right antler for this animal, has two little nodules there, and you can see it here. And the reason why I photograph these stags is because over the last few years, and especially this year, we've had quite a large problem with poaching, in particular trophy poaching, where basically this animal here, and we actually haven't seen it this year, and unfortunately we think it might have been shot. We do get poachers come in where they will shoot this stag, take the head and leave the body. Again, very gruesome. I was debating whether or not to include it, but I think it's very important because it's a very real situation that a lot of people don't realize happens in Ireland, but it is happening right now. And basically I use these photos in the event that if these photos are shared online in a shooting group or the likes, we can identify that this was one of our individuals. Again, we don't own these deer. They are passing visitors, but this time of year they tend to stay in the reserve itself. So if one of these does end up on the Facebook shooting page, there's a very good chance it was taken from Dunsany. We actually had a stag shot about 3-4 weeks ago, and that exactly happened. The stag was shot, the head was taken, and the body was left. So a not so nice type of photography identification, but very important nonetheless. I've been told that this is similarly used in safaris in South Africa, where they'll take as many photos as they can of lions, rhinos, and then they can use it to identify animals that have been killed through poaching. Hopefully you can still see that. I think my computer slowed up a bit there, but I'll trust that I'm still on course. Right, so the next bit of photography I'll talk about is the use in behavior studies. So photos are hard evidence. It's very hard to disprove a photo, although it's not as hard now with the introduction of AI, but for the most part, photography is excellent in behavior studies. So this photo here is actually of a cuckoo, and then you have a meadow pipit beside it. These are actually the small birds that cuckoo will lay their eggs in their nest. And in this situation, I had a meadow pipit trying to scare off the cuckoo. Right. So back to using photos and videos for identification. Uh, Theorized behavior. So theorized behavior can often be proved using videos and photos. In this situation, this is actually from South Africa. We would have done a lot of these. This is called a BROV. So it stands for Baited Remote Underwater Video. You can see in the bottom right corner, it's basically got a frame where on one side you have the white bait canister, which is stuffed with fish, sardines, whatever smells worst. And then you put a GoPro on the other end. So you have a theory of certain behavior that you're looking for. You drop this down 20, 30, 40 meters, and then you record for an hour and you can check. So in this situation, we had a theory that the closer we put these BROVs to the Cape for a seal colony, the less cat sharks we were seeing. And somebody put forward the question, do the seals prey on the cat sharks? Which up until this point, it was only a theory we hadn't really proven, until I managed to get this photo of exactly that. So you have a leopard cat shark and a Cape fur seal. And these photos were sent off to various different other research groups around South Africa, basically kind of showing that we had confirmed it. But again, this mightn't be enough to fully prove it. This could have been a once-off. So these photos will be sent around for other organizations to use. And then if they end up capturing similar evidence, then it can all be compiled and put forward as an actual behavior instead of theorized behavior. Back to South Africa as well. It's just a short story of an unusual behavior. I did have this as a video. Unfortunately, the videos will not play through Zoom, but this is a black-headed heron, and it was displaying very unusual behavior. So I was trying to film this bird through my large lens there, you can see there. So my internship project, I focused on bird behavior in this estuary. And one of the birds we found was this black-headed heron. And unusually, it was looking up to the sky, which, it being a predator, that should not be the case. They should be fixated on the ground. And it was in this small tree looking up at the sky. So that drew our attention upwards, where we found we were being circled by a sea eagle. So this is an African sea eagle, or an African fish eagle. It had only been heard at the estuary, and this was the first time it had been recorded at the estuary. So this kind of led us on a tangent, and we ended up trying to track down this eagle. Started early the next morning, just after sunrise. This shot I took from, I think, about 700 meters away. You can just about see something sitting on the fence there. So we started tracking up closer to it. Turns out we had two fish eagles, which hadn't been seen before in this area. So that was completely unbeknownst to us until we saw the heron acting unusually and looking up to the sky, which, as a predator, they don't do that. Usually they're fixated on the ground to whatever it is they're trying to hunt. So heavily cropped and a lot of heat haze, but that is the photo of the fish eagle pair. So back to Ireland for a second. Another use of photography in behavioral studies. Another benefit to photography is you can go back and examine behavior through a photo or a video, whereas if you're just using binoculars, you have to look at it there and then and just try and remember the behavior, whereas footage and photos are far more valuable. So in this situation, I had two fox cubs. I found a den in Dunsany. I got up early the next morning and I went out to film them and photograph them. And unusually, I had one cub which looked quite different to the rest of them. So I took these photos, I sent them on to Randall, who owns Dunsany Nature Reserve. He passed them on to an expert, and to put a long story short, these foxes aren't siblings, they're actually cousins. So something that I didn't know at the time, vixens or female foxes will often leave their cubs with each other while they go off hunting. So what you have here is the cub closest to the ground is a few months old, maybe 3-4 months old, and the cub standing on top of him was only a few weeks old. So you can see the eyes of the cub on the top are much bluer, they're much fresher, and much younger. So again, if I had just been there with binoculars, I probably wouldn't have even noticed this, but noticing afterwards in the photo, they were both very different looking. We found out that they weren't from the same litter. Another example of, I suppose, last minute encounters and unusual behavior. I took this photo down in Wexford, just off Hook Head. I specifically went down to photograph jellyfish. At the time, there were plenty around. And this compass jellyfish, when I approached it from underneath, I tried to get a photo with the sun above it coming through it. I saw this fish inside it. I just figured it was prey for the jellyfish because I knew that that was a method that they use for feeding. But out of nowhere, all of a sudden, this fish just left the jellyfish, came straight over to me, checked out the dome on the front of my camera, and then went back into the jellyfish. So what was going on here was a nice little symbiotic relationship where this juvenile pollock, which was only about 3 inches long, this was eating the parasites on the jellyfish, and in return, the jellyfish was protecting it from larger predators, larger fish, and they were quite happy to drift along in the current. So again, last minute unexpected behavior. And if I hadn't got the camera, if I was just out snorkeling, I probably wouldn't have even noticed this. I would have maybe even tried to avoid it. But everything in the ocean usually has a different story going on behind the scenes. So further with photography is habitat monitoring. So this is just an aerial view of Dunsany. These are excellent. Drones are excellent for monitoring areas from a different perspective. So in this situation, we were looking for flooded areas in the forest. We'd had quite a lot of rain, and we just wanted to determine flooded areas that the deer might be avoiding as well as other animals. And it's just brilliant how good they are in this day and age. So again, for situations like, say, climate collapse around a river, and you can see erosion around a river, it gives a very different perspective when it's taken from above with a drone. So I've been compiling a few years worth of drone footage now from all around the country, but a lot in Dunsany. Another useful function of photography is documenting areas that aren't seen. So this photo here this is called a split level photograph. I could have just taken it from beneath the surface, but I also think, like I said earlier, it's good to include perspective and scale. So I have split the horizon with the surface of the water. So this river is down in Kildare. I was trying to photograph trout passing by. I didn't manage to get any in this situation, but this is something that most people don't see is a riverbed. So these photos will be passed on to local research groups, maybe Inland Fisheries Ireland, anyone who might have use for these photos. Similarly to the last one, this is a photo down in Mullaghmore in County Sligo. So I wanted to deliberately go down and show the kelp down around that area because I'd been here before, but I hadn't got the camera. So I wanted to document and show what a seabed looks like without kelp or without a large amount of kelp. So you'll see it there on the left. That is how the kelp looked in here. I'll show it more in a second. But a healthy kelp bed should look something like this. It should be a thick forest that you can't see the seabed. And this is where pretty much everything is going to be hiding in. You'll have spider crabs, pollock, wrasse, various different fish species hiding in and out of this. But another thing is kelp is excellent for sequestering carbon. It produces oxygen, and it's actually been confirmed that kelp forests produce as much, if not more, oxygen than rainforests. So to have less and less kelp, it means less and less oxygen. So another reason to protect the kelp environments around Ireland. Similarly, this is what a kelp forest should look like. There should be schools of fish around. So the photo on the top left is a wrasse. It's a corkwing wrasse. And then you have that nice golden bronze pollock down in the middle. And then, sorry, I'm skipping one. Then you have the kelp from Mullaghmore. So this isn't human interaction. This is basically from heavy wave action. So anyone who's heard of Mullaghmore probably knows it's one of the surf capitals of the world. The waves in Mullaghmore have reached massive heights, 50 feet high in some parts of the year. But in this situation, these fronds of kelp have been battered over years by the waves. And this is what it looks like now. So this pollock here, although it's not a great photo, this is the only pollock that I encountered down here. So going from a kelp forest that has schools of pollock to finding a single pollock where there's no kelp, I think it just goes to show how important kelp is for both biodiversity and for oxygen as well. But yeah, I deliberately wanted to showcase what an environment looks like without kelp. So the last bit is education and advocacy. So I have done a lot with puffins and the salties. These are the absolutely fantastic, colorful looking birds. Each one has their own little personality, but they're also on decline or on their decline. This island 100 years ago had thousands of breeding pairs, and I think recently I had something like 2,000 breeding pairs on the island. So these are seasonal birds. They come around March, April, and then they leave kind of July time. But they come to nest, they come to breed, and they come to feed on the sand eels. And photography is an excellent use of spreading awareness of issues such as declines in their fish stocks, like the sand eels that they feed on. Similarly, another use that it's actually how I've kind of grown my skill set is in Dunsany. It's basically documenting the various different species that we have there. So this is a woodpecker. It's a great spotted woodpecker. It's the only species of woodpecker we have here in Ireland. And basically what I try to do as best I can is to document however many species we have, maybe how many of a certain species we have, and just constantly build up a bank of what I have. So these are just 5 of the species that would be kind of considered quite rare in Ireland. Again, the top left is a woodpecker that was taken in Dunsany. All of these photos were actually taken in Dunsany, bar the otter. I've just included the otter for reference, but we do have otters in Dunsany in the stream. That particular photo I took down in Connemara, but I said I'd include it anyway. So then you have your pine marten, your red kite, and your peregrine falcon. So one thing that it's kind of stood out to me more than anything is when I tell people the rare species we have, most of the time people will understand if you have 1 or 2 rare species. Almost every rare species in Ireland can be found in Dunsany Nature Reserve. So your woodpeckers, otters, pine marten. We've even had sightings of stoat, which up until a few years ago, most people didn't even realize we had in this country. And then the peregrine falcons there as well. That's the fastest animal on the planet, and they do frequent Dunsany as well. So using conservation versus nature photography. So the photo on the left is, they're both red kites, but the photo on the left is, I suppose, more kind of naked, if you can spot what I'm looking at. The red kite on the right, instantly there's something different about it. You'll notice it has 2 wing tags. So a simple photograph like this, they're both eye-catching, but the addition of those 2 little tags, they will again make people ask questions, and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to create a talking point around a photo and then that can open a door into a further conversation about their conservation. So in this situation, red kites were extinct in Ireland, I think as far as 200 years ago, and they've been reintroduced from 2007 in Wicklow, and they've since spread out. But the bird on the right has been tagged. It was probably tagged as a juvenile, as a chick. And then the wing tags will have different colors and a number, so you can differentiate where it's from and the year that it has been released. Another use of conservation photography is to show vulnerability and, I suppose, tug at the heartstrings, if you like. So powerful photos capture beauty, uniqueness, and vulnerability of wildlife with a single moment. So this photo, I've had two reactions from this. Some people will kind of laugh at it, and it, like, in a sense, it is kind of funny, but it's also quite sad. This photo was down in Offaly. I was actually down looking for something else. I was actually down looking for white-tailed eagles, and there had been some spotted a few days before I went, and I ended up finding these, and I couldn't shake the fact that in Dunsany, I try so hard to try and find these nests. I will look for weeks to try and find the nest, to then go on, get a license and film the nest. And I just happened to find this one, and it happened to be in a telegraph pole and not a tree. So I think it's important to show photos like this. Again, they're controversial. They grab your attention, but it also shows a message. Why was this nesting in a telegraph pole when there's woodlands in Offaly? Again, those woodlands, they're not native. So that's kind of bringing that into the conversation as well. But basically, photos like this, they are themselves an advocate for the biodiversity crash in Ireland at the moment, and climate change issues like that. I'm just going to use this one as an example. So this is a prime example of nature versus conservation photography. All that it's missing is a narrative. So in this one, it's very easy. It's an easy meal. That's all that it is. You have, I must preface this actually by saying this is in Malaysia. This isn't Ireland. So these are smooth-coated otters in Malaysia. They are, I think they're listed as vulnerable. But basically this was on a floating village in a mangrove. It was a fishing community, and I was on a mangrove trip, and we came across these three otters, and one of them was stealing a fish. So you can kind of point to the comical side of it. You've got two otters in the back, maybe keeping watch. They're the accomplices, if you like. And then you have the other one stealing a fish. So on one hand, you have an easy meal. And then on the other hand, you have their only meal. So the reason these otters were actually there is because the fishing community there, which obviously they need to eat as well, it's very important, their diet consists mainly of seafood, and the otter's diet consists of seafood. So you've got a clash there where you've got wildlife coming into a village to try and get food because it's easier than going out to have to look and find food where there might not be any, or there might be very little. So conservation photography would look at this, and you'd have that narrative of they're struggling, they're endangered, they're vulnerable, whatever the case may be. You're basically getting that message across. Whereas a nature photographer might just put it up as a nice photograph. So it's important to add context to it and add a narrative to a photograph to really kind of emphasize the conservation issues around it. So lastly, education and advocacy is crucial for rarer species facing threats towards their environments. So this is again a cuckoo. I actually had this photo featured in one of the Irish Wildlife Trust magazine issues. This was down in Connemara, and since then I've learned as much as I can about cuckoos. And one of the largest threats they're facing is agriculture. So as I said, moorland, marshland, bogland, this is where these birds thrive. And it's also where their host species thrive, the meadow pipit. And when you have agricultural I would say issues, agricultural practices coming in, such as insecticides, that's killing the likes of caterpillars, which the meadow pipits feed on. When you have no caterpillars, that reduces the number of your meadow pipits, and then that's reducing the amount of nests that cuckoos can lay their eggs in. So it's very important to use photos like this to spread awareness around issues like that. Simply put, these photos are eye-catching, and that's what you want to hold somebody's attention at the start, and then that opens the door for a deeper conversation about the conservation issues. Now, lastly, the target audience isn't necessarily the person already interested in conservation efforts, it's the person who isn't. I'll finish up on this point. It's not the person that already has a fascination with nature and outdoors and wildlife that I want to try and influence. It's the person that couldn't care less. They're the people that I want my photos to have the greatest impact on. So this photo here of a red squirrel, this is the first time I've photographed a red squirrel in Ireland. A lot of people know that they were declining in numbers. And then when you tell someone that you took this photograph 5 minutes in their home, they're suddenly more aware of it. They're going out looking for them. They're more conservation minded. Something as simple as that can just change the way somebody starts thinking. So that's basically my final point, is that it's not necessarily the audience who are already interested in conservation, it's the audience that aren't, that need changing the most. So thank you very much. I hope I haven't spent too long, but yeah, that's basically been conservation photography and the use of wildlife photography in that.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Daniel. I'll just give you a sec. So yeah, so that was a brilliant presentation. That was extremely informative, and I definitely learned loads. And if anyone has any questions, just put them into the Q&A box. But yeah, so I'll give everyone a few minutes and then I'll start going through them. And I'll just start off the questions. And say one thing that struck me was just how you say when you were photographing that jellyfish, and if you thought, if you had been in there swimming, you probably would have been trying to, or not swimming or diving, just without the camera, you would have been actively trying to avoid the jellyfish probably, or you wouldn't have, like, you would have seen the situation from a different perspective. And whereas when you had the camera in your hands, and that's how you ended up witnessing that unusual relationship, or the symbiotic relationship between the two in that instance. And I just would wonder how has your relationship with nature changed since becoming a photographer, either as just as a citizen or from your scientific background, and how has that changed your perspective on nature in like picking up a camera?
Yeah, it's definitely it's changed quite a lot. Before photography, even though I would have had an interest in wildlife and nature, bringing a camera into it, I find that I'm constantly looking around for unusual sightings or habits. But even the likes of that, say for example, the jellyfish, most people, myself included, unless I have a wetsuit on, you're going to avoid the likes of a jellyfish. So when I have a reason to be closer to it, I start to notice different behaviors. It's the same if you're out in nature and you're walking and you don't stop. You might have a look at something for a second, and it's only when you stop and you're quiet, that's when you start to see the differences. Like, since starting as a photographer, I've noticed how intelligent so many animals are. I'll just use a jay for an example. Those birds are one of the smartest animals I have ever come across. If I'm sitting in camo or I'm sitting in a hide, those jays will come down, land on the roof of the hide, chatter back and forth to each other in noises that they don't make in front of people. They only communicate to each other with those noises, and they'll discuss whether or not I'm in the hide. And then if they come down and land and I move the lens even a fraction, they're gone. So it's really highlighted the intelligence of animals by just being more aware of their presence and their behaviors since getting into photography.
Okay, brilliant. So I'll ask a few questions from here. So one of the first questions is, yeah, which wildlife are you hoping to photograph or film next in Ireland? Do you have any big projects that you're seeking out?
Yeah, I would love to do a little bit more with pine martens. We have them in Dunsany, and I've got them almost every time I leave out a trail camera. But they also have a habit of coming out at 3 a.m. So not the most ideal to try and photograph, but I'd love to try and photograph them more. As for, I suppose, upcoming projects, I have a few. There's one or two that I won't talk about just because it hasn't been finalized yet. One that I have coming up is myself and a sound recordist are planning on doing a bit of collaboration with Curlews in Ireland, where he said he's always wanted to record their sound, and I've always wanted to kind of put together a bit of a feature of them. I've seen them, I've photographed them before, but to actually put together maybe a short clip, a short documentary with them would be excellent. And then on top of that, uh, just this year, I was granted a license to photograph humpback whales. So I think with the weather at the moment, I don't think it's going to happen before the end of the year, but it's always an open for next year. That's definitely the number one on my list at the moment is the humpback whales.
Okay, brilliant. That's really exciting. So next question is how do access restrictions affect you, especially with private land ownership? Do you tend to contact landowners to avoid this, or do you mainly do commission work and then you can avoid this issue?
Anywhere that I go, unless it's public, like say Glenlock and Wicklow or Killarney National Park, I will always ask for permission. Um, Even if it's someone that I haven't been in contact with for a while, say I've got permission once and I haven't been there for a few years or even a few months, always message to just ask if it would be okay to go in. 9 times out of 10, they'll say yes. If they say no, there's usually a reason behind it. That's okay. Otherwise, for the likes of commission work, that's kind of already been included in that discussion, but I will always ask for permission, whether it's just to hop a gate to go into a field. It's as simple as just knocking on the door down the road, asking if they know the owner, or if they are the owner, just explain you do a bit of wildlife photography, and that usually gets you in the door fairly quickly because it's not very harmful to anything.
Okay, cool. And someone else has asked, do you have any further tips for reaching people who are not already interested in conservation or wildlife?
That's a good question. I think social media is excellent now. I think the stories that are being told on social media, it's unparalleled how important it is. I'm trying to think now, how could I phrase that now? Photos are great. Videos have their own use as well. A photo will capture a single moment, which again, it might hold your attention for a few seconds or a minute, but a video can do more than that. It can really bring across emotions. It can bring across an animal's intelligence. Um, the video side of things, it's excellent for getting somebody on board for that. But between social media and photography and videography, those are excellent ways of reaching that audience, I suppose.
Okay, great. Thank you. And the question is, what was the most challenging picture you've taken in regards to your own well-being? So, like if there's a weather challenge or waiting time or any other big challenges that you faced?
There's probably a few of these now. The most challenging photo that I've taken was the woodpecker feeding his chick, but again, that wasn't towards my well-being. I'd say the most challenging photo would have been, it's probably something underwater. Um, because again, my photos that I do underwater, aside from the crayfish with the diver, all of those were free diving. So I just hold my breath and go down. Again, never dive without a buddy. But when you're in choppy swell and there's a current and you're trying to kick against the current to stay level with a jellyfish or stay level with a dogfish, those are usually the most challenging, especially when you come back up and you're really low on breath and you have one more chance of going down to get it, but you also have to be smart about pushing your limits. I think anything with diving is usually the riskiest. That or being out in a small boat in big waves.
Okay, cool. And then we have another question about, so this is just someone who's seen your work before, and they've seen your photo of the Scarlet Elf Cup. And they were just wondering how much photography you've done documenting fungi around Dunsany, and if you're documenting much of that.
Again, kind of similar to the wildlife, I tried to build up a bank of everything that I've seen in Dunsany, including for fungi. So I have maybe 15, 20 different species. The Scarlet Elf Cups, they only really kind of show up with cold weather. So if the weather is very mild, they don't come up as numerous, if you like. I think the first year I started in Dunsany, or maybe the January after I started, we had a bit of snow and they were everywhere. The forest floor was bright red, bright orange. But I have got other species that I've documented. So I have massive, like chicken of the woods mushrooms, which are orange and yellow that cling to the side of a tree. And then I have tiny mushrooms that are a few millimeters in height. So I'm trying to build up a bank of that as well. So if anyone wants to get in contact with me and ask what photos I have, please do. I'll be happy to share with them.
Great, thank you. And just on that, do you think a lot of your photos, because I think, as you said during the presentation, that there's some instances where there's behaviors in animals that would have just happened, and you were just you happened to be out in the field, obviously
Yeah.
working, and then you got to witness these amazing moments. But how much of it do you think? I guess it's a balancing act, really, of planning out, really knowing the animal,
Yeah.
doing a lot of research and work, and then also just being opportunistic, and being ready for these situations, being able to adapt to something that comes that you're not prepared for. And yeah, how much is that a balance, or how do you deal with that?
I honestly, it goes both ways. There's been times where I have planned to within an inch and it's all gone wrong. There was it was actually only recently, I was camping out with a friend trying to photograph stags for a rut, and the stags were roaring all night. And the next morning we got up, and the purpose to camp out was because where we were going, we would have had to cross a field. We would have had to go through a woodland, cross a field to another woodland. And even in the dark, you will be seen by the deer. So the theory was we'll camp beside the hide, get out of the tent, get straight into the hide, there, ready to go. The stags were roaring all night. We were all set to go, very excited. And as soon as morning came like that, the stags all stopped and they disappeared. And that was the end of the rut. Overnight, just stopped. But then on the other hand, there's times where planning and preparation makes a difference. I photographed and filmed kingfishers on the River Boyne, not too far from where I am. And that was one of the very, very few times where planning worked out. I got there for the time that I wanted. Kingfishers were already coming to and from the log that was overhanging the river that I had found. And I got about 2.5 hours of 3 different kingfishers coming to this log right in front of me. They weren't afraid of me, even though I was in camo. They knew I was a person, but they weren't afraid. But again, one of the few times that planning has worked. So it's a bit, I won't say it's 50-50. It's usually 80-20, but it changes. It might be 80% luck, 20% planning, or vice versa. Sometimes it's more 50-50, but a lot of the time it's right place, right time, but you can improve those chances by planning.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. And I'll just take a few more questions. Don't want to keep you here all evening. So someone else has asked, what would you think are ideal subjects for a novice photographer, or maybe a good place to start in someone trying to build their skills?
I like this question. This is one of the first questions I asked when I started out. One of the best places you can go is a local park. Every local park will have everything from as simple as crows. And I know that sounds a bit boring. Crows are excellent because they are wild. They're really funny to watch and they're really intelligent. So if you can practice on the likes of crows, or say you go to the Phoenix Park, you've got squirrels, deer, crows. I think you have hare in the Phoenix Park as well. Um, a local park is the most ideal. But I think species wise, hare are great because they're very relaxed and you can try and get close to them and then they'll let you know when you're too close just by running away, but they won't completely run. They usually just run a distance and stop, and you can kind of stalk up to them again. So hares were probably my favorite to start out on. If you can find any park that has hares or anywhere that has hares, they're great to practice on because they're such calm, timid animals, but you'll know your limits very quickly with how close you can get to them.
Okay, great. And similar on a similar vein, this might be a difficult question to answer, is if there's any kinds of cameras that you'd usually recommend to beginners.
Yeah, so I shoot Nikon. That's just what I started with. The first camera I ever used, it wasn't one that I owned. It was just the first I ever used was a Nikon. I like the feel of it, like the settings, like the user interface. I just thought it suited me. I started out with, and I still have it, a Nikon D5600. So I got it as a kit. It came with, I think, a kit lens, an 18 to 55, and it came with a 70 to 300, which I still use today. That photo actually of the otters in Malaysia, I took that with that camera. I didn't want to bring my big camera with me, so I brought that one. And to this day, it still takes incredible photos. And I think you can pick one up secondhand now for about maybe €200 or €300, including the lenses, which, considering how good of a camera it is for the price, it's excellent. But for anyone who wants to use, say, Canon, they have an equivalent camera. So if you look up a Nikon D5600, look up the equivalent in Canon, and you'll find that just as easily.
Okay, and we've had a few questions as well just about Dunsany and accessibility to Dunsany. So could you, yeah, just give people a bit of information about visiting?
Yeah, so at the moment it is closed to the public. The tours are only from kind of spring onwards. We might have it open a little bit earlier this year, but at the moment it is closed. Partly for the fact that we have the deer in there. Over the winter, the deer will kind of congregate around kind of the lands surrounding the castle, and they tend to kind of spook quite easily after the rut. During the rut, you can get as close as you can try. The stags are concentrating only on themselves, but once the rut ends, they are as watchful as I don't know what. They will spot you 300 meters away further. So this time of year, we try and keep people out for that exact reason, because we can end up spooking the herd across the road or into a different wood, or just spooking them in general. And if they run and break their leg because there's no medical attention for them, they will die. So it's just a case of looking after them as well. But the tour should open again early spring next year.
Okay, yeah, that's brilliant. And I think I just had, yeah, then just this is probably my last question. And I think if anyone else has any more, if there's any other points you want to add, Daniel, feel free. But so yeah, if are there any do you have any favorite photographers or shots that have maybe influenced your work or maybe inspired you to do what you do? Yeah, outside of your own work.
Yeah, definitely. I'll pick two. In Ireland, there is a photographer based down in Clare, George Carbus. I think he's from the Czech Republic originally, but he's living here now a very long time. But he does ocean photography, surf photography, underwater photography, and for anyone interested in that. His use of light, he doesn't use strobes or flashes. He uses natural light, and his use of natural light is second to none. He had a photo, I think it won a category in the Wildlife Photographer of the Year as well. So again, phenomenal photographer. Really, really good just for learning kind of different aspects, different viewpoints, different I suppose frames, if you like. And then outside of Ireland, and he's probably the most famous photographer in the world, Paul Nicklin. So he's a National Geographic photographer, ex-National Geographic, massive conservation advocate. He has set up his own foundation now, but his photos, he's been all over the world. He does a lot of Arctic and Antarctic material, but for one photo, he has a shot of a leopard seal underwater, and it's just about to catch a penguin, but it's happening right in front of the lens, and it's a phenomenal photo to look at. And hearing him, you can look up and listen to the story behind it, but hearing him talk about that photo behind the scenes is incredible. So Paul Nicklin and George Carbis would probably be my two heroes, I suppose, if you like, in the photography world.
Okay, cool. And actually, just on that, I've thought of another question of, do you have any favorite habitats or environments that you'd like to work in, or are there one, like, would you dream of working in the Arctic at some point in the future, or are you happy staying in Ireland and working for biodiversity in Ireland, or yeah, do you have any favorite habitats or
Yeah,
dream habitats?
I definitely want to continue work in Ireland and help with the biodiversity conservation as well here. But I also do want to do a lot of traveling and bring the camera with me. I think the dream has been either the Arctic or kind of complete opposite side of the scale, the Amazon. I think they're both places that have massive range in wildlife. But the Arctic definitely, and I'd like a return trip to South Africa. I specifically went for great whites, and I didn't have a single sighting of great whites. You might have seen it in the news. There were two killer whale brothers that taught themselves how to hunt great whites, and because of that, they scared all of the great whites away from the bay that I was based in. So I have vowed that I will return someday, and I'll get a chance to dive with great whites and photograph great whites.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. And so yeah, I'd say we can wrap up soon. We do have a few questions from people just about obtaining licenses and permission and just kind of getting into wildlife photography in general, which I can, I mean, if right now, if there's maybe some resources you might want to mention, but what I can also do is I can send an email to attendees as well with maybe some links to websites where they can get information, and the same for information on Paul Nicklin as well. And I've forgotten the other
George
George,
Carbis.
yeah. And then there's also someone else has also mentioned the International League of Conservation Photographers is a great place for
Yeah,
inspiration. So
they're
yeah,
fantastic.
would you have any favorite places for information? And then yeah, I will share them with people as well after this.
Yeah, I'm trying to think now. I'll just mention briefly, just say for the licenses. So all of the licensing is done through the National Parks and Wildlife Services. You can fill out an application form, but I will say you need a reason. You can't just go and photograph a nest just because you'd like to. So for my reasons, I've put Dunsany because obviously it's an ongoing conservation project there. I submit a report at the end of the year with how many chicks fledged the nest. That one, I think that the one I showed there, we had two chicks leave it. We thought it was one, and that was actually another point I meant to bring in, but because the video wasn't working, I couldn't. Because of video and audio, I could listen back and we could hear a second chick inside the nest while the other one had its beak closed at the entrance, and we couldn't figure out why it was still making noise. So that's another reason. But yeah, the National Parks and Wildlife Services are great for information on species and licensing as well. Yeah.
Okay, so I think, yeah, that's everything. And yeah, just a huge thank you to Daniel for joining us tonight and for putting on such a great presentation, and for everyone else for attending on your Tuesday or Wednesday evening. So yeah, I'll share the details afterwards, and any sort of extra information that Daniel or I may come up with that you might want to know. And this will be uploaded shortly onto YouTube as well, and it'll be accessible on demand. And thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
All right. Good night.
Woo!